of these names that are very unfamiliar to us. Thank you for wading through all of that. And for a bit of introduction on Haggai. Haggai, of course, is a shorter book than that of Habakkuk that we listened to and talked about last week. And of course, little is known about this person as well. He begins by saying, in the second year of King Darius, when the majority of Israel's histories were oriented around the Israelite kings, this one is not. So Haggai dates the prophetic word of God to Darius, who came into power in about 522 BCE. So at the near the end of the exiles, but still a few hundred years before Jesus comes. And he says, in the second year, the 6th month, on the first day of the month, God speaks to Haggai. The specific dating also suggests to us that Haggai was a scribe and that he was educated, and you saw even more details in the reading. And then Zechariah, following him, writes in the same way. So the people of Judah then are in exile for 65-ish years by then, and they are asked to move out of, to leave what is now their comfortable homes, although they're subpar, they're not what they were used to rebuild the temple. So they've been stripped of everything that is their identity, that symbolize their identity. The place of God's presence, which is the temple, the fruit of their labors, the cattle, crops, gifts from other countries, like the jewel and lumber, precious metals, and the place of God's promise, the land. But they've lived in the land of the Babylonians for a generation or two, so it is all that many of them have ever known. This is a new reality for the younger people. Still, they do not know, or they do know, that they are marginalized, that they are oppressed. They are less than human to Darius and his constituents. What? My watch decides to do things without me giving it permission. So they're oppressed by Darius and his. They aren't considered people of God. They aren't given that the glory of being in God's glory, and because it is in their very DNA of the people to long for God, to be in right relationship with God, God's words to them are enormously important, and God is speaking directly to them through Haggai. Rebuilding the temple, though, seems to be just the starting point for God's message. As one commentator puts it, the words from God speak about God more than the temple. The glory of any building said to represent God and house the people of God is really more about God than about any buildings. My spirit abides, God says through Haggai. That's the story you need to focus on, not the building, and not on who's here and who's not there. True, we want the place to be a place that speaks of God, and we need to take care of what we've been handed down. But God says, I've got all the gold in the world. I've got all the silver, and it's already mine. You can't honor God by giving something that God already owns. Stuff happens out there in the world. God is moving. Pay attention to that. Seek the glory of God in the spirit that abides. I'm constantly drawn to this word glory, and it's everywhere. It appears around 200 times in the Hebrew Bible. It is used to describe something about God, but does so in a variety of ways, and I just really want to understand what this means. And my little Enneagram 5 compatriot understands this even more. Because it seems to be crucial about our relationship with God. Glory, so the Hebrew word is kavod. is mostly translated as glory or honor, but it's also translated as wealth or to indicate a costly adornment. And sometimes it indicates a measurement, like the full measure, a cup of flour. So in Exodus 29:43, it says, I will meet with the Israelites. I will be there, and the land will be sanctified. The land is sanctified by God's glory. Pay attention to all the components of that. I will meet with Israel. Be there. And the land will be sanctified by my glory. That means made holy, made right, renewed, anew. In Exodus 4, all throughout Exodus chapter 40, and Leviticus 9, the tent of meeting. It's the tent of meeting. God's glory means that God is meeting with Moses. So in Leviticus 9:23, Moses and Aaron entered the tent of meeting and then came out and blessed the people. And the glory of the Lord appeared to all the people. So they spent time meeting with God in a space utterly saturated by God's very presence. And when they came out of it, they blessed. They were agents of God's blessing just by spending time being in God's presence. And the blessing was that they ushered in and were agents of God's presence to the people. In Isaiah 6:3, holy, holy, holy. The whole earth is full. And it says full, not filled. Full of God's glory, which seems to indicate a measured amount, the full amount, the correct amount, or precise measurement of God's presence, God's provision. God alone is enough. God alone is sufficient. St. Teresa's prayer. Too much or too little of something can spoil a recipe, right? Just the right amount is just right. It's enough. So God is telling the exiled people of Judah that it doesn't matter if they have the resources or not, because God owns it all, and God is enough. And being with God, that's the point. In our Bible study every first and third Wednesday of the month, we're talking about the parables of Jesus. And this past Wednesday, we were talking about the parable of the pearl of great price, found in Matthew 13. The kingdom of heaven is like a merchant seeking beautiful pearls, who, when he found one pearl of great price, went and sold all that he had and bought it. There's a sense that this merchant is kind of darting around, trying to find the right kind of pearls to sell, and doesn't even know really what it is that he wants. Not until it pops up. It's a surprise. He finds this great, costly pearl and decides to sell everything else. And Amy Jill Levine, the author of this particular study, says, we are continually seeking whether the object is fine pearls, a new job, another degree, or spiritual fulfillment. But each time we find our goal, it turns out to be ephemeral. There's always a new career, a new form of study, a nagging sense that we have not done what we need to do. Like there's still something more. Will we know what we truly want when we see it? Will we know it? Once we know that material goods will only collect rust or dust, and once we know that the only thing that counts is treasure in heaven, surely we must find a new way to live. Isn't that so precious? She's not going to collect any dust. Yes, very good. A new way to live. One that might mean moving out of what is comfortable, even if it's subpar. Paul tells us in Romans, we do not live to ourselves, we do not die to ourselves. If we live to the Lord, and if we die to the Lord. So then whether we live or whether we die, we are the Lord's. For to this end Christ died and lived again. Christ died and lived again so that we would live and die to the Lord, so that he might be the Lord of both the dead and the living. So why do you pass judgment on your brother or sister? Or why do you despise your brother or sister? For we will all stand before the judgment seat of God. For it is written, as I live, says the Lord, every knee shall bow to me, every tongue shall give praise to God. So then, each of us will be accountable to God. We are all interconnected. We are all accountable to God together, which means we are also accountable to one another, to each other. What is your pearl of great price? What is it that you are perhaps too attached to or striving after that you need to let go of in order to follow Christ on the way and to know God's presence, to meet with God? What is keeping us? What is keeping me from noticing God's presence? Because God is everywhere. It's just my needing to notice. And then how will you be Christ to another, God's blessing of presence to another, love someone else, if you do not understand what their pearl of great price is? That's also from Amy Jill Levine, that perspective. How will we know how to be a blessing to somebody else if you do not know what is actually that blessing? Love language. What is it that they need from us? What's out there? Who are they? And when we are listening into what the pearl of great price is for another, rather than flitting around trying to find something other than God's own goodness and provision, we can know what God is asking us to do. Leaving the comfort of our space, even if it's not fulfilling, it's still familiar and it's known. But I love this from Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was tried and hanged for speaking out against Hitler's project. That was uncomfortable. He said, we're not to simply bandage the wounds of victims beneath the wheels of injustice. We're not supposed to let injustice roll over people and then bandage their wounds. We are to drive a spoke into the wheel itself. What does that mean for us? And perhaps the injustice isn't against just a person. This new way to live is key. One reason increasingly evident for finding a new way to live, and that we really need to be doing this, is all the extreme weather that we're having, right? There was a Reuters report that said in Illinois, millions of acres of fields were left unseeded in the $51 billion U.S. corn market, and crops that were planted late were at a greater risk for damage from severe weather during the growing season. Together, the problems heap more pain on a farm sector that has suffered from years of low crop prices and a U.S.-China trade war that is slowing agricultural exports. Nationwide, farmers are expected to harvest the smallest corn crop in 4 years, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. The agency recently reduced its planting estimate by 3.2% from May and its yield estimate by 5.6%. And we have all felt this reality here in Durand. We know farmers, some of us are farmers here, and it's affecting everyone, and it's not slowing down. And so there's this guy named Josh Richardson, and I've told some of you about him. He is interning with the Rockford and DeKalb districts of the UMC this year as part of his field education at Garrett Seminary. So Superintendent Brendan Meyer mayor recommended our church and the Malta UMC for this project. So he's interested in learning how our rural churches, so we're one of those, in Northern Illinois function on a theological and pragmatic level, aiming to help facilitate our community's adaptation to climate change.